The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. This is Robert Chakowski, Managing Partner for On-Demand Advisors, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, which is focused on creating demand that you're going to need for a successful 2023. We all need demand. We need demand in 2022, but we also know that this is a critical time as we're heading into fourth quarter to start planning how we're going to scale for next year. So that was really the theme. But one of the things I would share with you today is that whether you are at a company today that has $1 million of revenue, $20 million of revenue, $100 million of revenue, we're going to talk about something that is really important, which is your ability to create sustainable demand for your company. And not only just any demand, but demand with the perfect audience, the demand with the audience that wants to engage and be your customer for life. The demand for the right fit for your company, for your services, for your solutions. So we're going to talk about that today, and we're going to really cover this strategic topic because this is really the flywheel, if you will, that gets everything going. It's the initiator in the process. So if you can find the right target audience that's a great fit for your service or solution, if you can get hundreds of them, thousands of them, engaged with you and take them through this buyer's journey, then you're going to be very successful in terms of scaling the company and scaling over time. Perhaps taking the company to an IPO, or if you're already public, to take it to greater strides and straighter lanes. So as with any of our webinars that we have, we encourage questions. So please go ahead and post any questions you have throughout today's webinar. We also have a Q&A session that we're going to get to later on in today's webinar, and make sure we address any questions that you have. If we don't get to all your questions, we'll make sure we address them separately with a follow-up call. And as always, we've got some great information to share with you today, and we'd like to see if you can apply it to your business model immediately. We also want to offer you some next steps that would be meaningful in terms of your journey today. So again, thank you for joining us. Today, Craig, myself, will be the facilitators, and Craig and I co-founded On-Demand Advisors as a revenue acceleration agency 13 years ago. And just to kind of set the stage, before we created On-Demand Advisors, we have built some very successful companies in Silicon Valley, technology companies, software services companies. And one of the things that we determined as we were building these very successful companies is, how do we scale these companies? How do we do it so it's predictable? How do we make sure that it's capital efficient? And how do we make sure that we're consistent in terms of scaling? And one of the things you find when you're working with venture-backed companies, as one of the companies that we worked at, which is Intact, software as a service company focused on financial applications, is they typically have expectations, as most investors do, that you're going to scale the company at 30, 40, 50, 100% year over year. And so they have expectations that need to be met. So one of the things that we learned is, how do you set those expectations, but more importantly, how do you meet them? So as we head into fourth quarter, we find most executives that are running companies are going to be coming up with a new set of numbers for 2023. The question isn't coming up with the number. The question is ensuring that you got the right mechanism to create the number. And that's where this demand comes into play, is having the right demand, having enough demand, and being able to graduate that through the marketing and sales processes or business development processes that you have at the company today. So we look forward to doing that. And Craig and I are going to tag team in terms of our discussion with you today. Now, one of the things that if you come to other webinars, you may recognize this. This is what we call the Revenue Acceleration System. And this is the distillation of the best practices that we have been implementing for our clients for over 13 years. And where really, there's a lot to unpack here, but we're going to just really focus today on one area, which is demand generation. But this represents best practices for many companies that are looking for a way to scale and do that in a very predictable way. When we were first scaling at Intact, we needed to really look at, okay, how do we grow the company by 30%, 50%, 70% year over year? How do we do that selling direct through our sales organization? How do we do that selling through partners? How do we do both? And so what we were able to do is really eat our own dog food, if you will, and perfect this methodology on how to do this in terms of this system. Now, the good news, as we're sharing our best practices with you today, is we've done this for hundreds of B2B companies. So this is really going to be the distillation of a lot of that knowledge and best practices that you can take with you today. So what are some of the common challenges that we typically hear when you're faced with creating demand? Well, first of all, for a lot of people, it's a scattered approach. It's piecemeal. You may try a marketing program over here, a campaign over here, a trade show over here, and each of these are very piecemeal approach that may or may not even be strategically aligned with where you want to go. Another thing that we see in many cases is whether there's missing ROI. It's not unusual for us to sit down with the CEO of a company, $35 million company, and that CEO will say, well, I spend, $600,000 on marketing investments, but I don't know where the ROI is. So help me understand how that translates into sales outcomes. Sometimes there's uncertainty. So you may be unsure about how you're going to scale your demand initiatives from year to year. It could be that maybe the messaging that you have today isn't resonating with your target audience or stakeholders. Also, there's sometimes lack of consistency. So one of the important things is to have a consistent demand that is feeding your sales organization, feeding your partner channel, and taking you forward. Some of you today attending may not have the resources to get the job done. So you may say, this sounds great, Bob and Craig, but we don't have maybe some of the marketing talent that we need to have in the company or sales talent to get the job done. Another issue is marketing leads may not be converting into sales opportunities. And finally, you may be missing or may see missing a compelling call to action. So somebody's interested in your company, but you may struggle with how to convert them into the next step in the process. So these are some common things. What I'd like to hear is some feedback from you today. And so if you would be kind enough, participate in our poll that we have here. I'll go ahead and launch this. So what's your biggest challenge? And you can check all the apply, by the way. What's your biggest challenges that you find creating demand for your company today? So go ahead and if you could weigh in on the poll, and we appreciate that. And what we'll do is we'll share the response that we have today with everybody on today's webinar. So we'll take about maybe 20 seconds to do this. You may be unsure how to scale your demand initiative. You may say, we've got a scattered approach. We're trying many options out, but we haven't really figured out where the vein to go is. You may say that the current methods aren't paying off. You may say that this sounds great, but we lack resources to be successful in this area. Or you may say that we lack quality leads when they're generated. So you may be generating leads, but they're not the quality that you're looking for. Okay, we'll just keep this open for just a little bit longer. And thank you everybody for participating. We appreciate that. Okay, let me go ahead and share the results here. Okay, what we have here then in terms of results. Okay, 44% of you stated that you're unsure how to scale your demand initiative. That's great. Another 44% stated that you've scattered in terms of trying out many different approaches. We see this many times with many executives, where you try this, try that, try this, try that, and sometimes you hit up with a dry hole when you're drilling. 11% state that the current methods are not paying off. 33% of you stated that you lack resources to be successful in this area. And then finally, 44% stated that you lack the quality of leads. And again, you all could participate in all these areas. So it's not unusual for many of you to see that you've got some of these challenges in more than one area. So thank you for participating with that. Okay. What we think is the cure to having a lack of demand or the right demand is putting in an engine. We call it the revenue acceleration engine. And what Craig and I are going to do today is we're going to walk you through what's in that engine, because when you put it in the engine, all you have to do is press on the pedal and you can go faster and you can slow down. But the engine has the various components. And we're going to talk through the major components here. So the first one about building successful, scalable demand that's going to lead to predictable revenue is having an intentional revenue acceleration plan. And so, like I said earlier, a lot of people have a number. The question is, what's the intentional plan? And I'm going to walk you through some examples. Secondly is messaging and positioning strategically. Eventually, somebody of power with your customer is going to buy your solution or service. And that decision maker is typically looking at what's the value that you're going to generate for them? What's the strategic benefits that I'm going to receive if we engage with you? You want to implement what we call one source of truth. So all of that knowledge can be in one place for you to leverage and to work with. And you want to create and execute what we call the buyer engagement roadmap, which is what's the most meaningful way to engage with your buyer, and do that in a not only repeatable way where you have a winning strategy, but do that in a very efficient way with velocity. And then finally, as you think about this engine that you put in place, how do you evaluate it and improve this engine over time so that you get better and better results? So let's step into number one here. Creating an intentional plan for revenue acceleration. Some of the hallmarks of doing this is to focus on what is your ideal customer profile. And this is really kind of important, because what we find is that as you build a service, as you build a solution, you basically have a customer in mind. You basically have an audience in mind. And so one of the keys that we find, unless you're a software development shop where you're just basically doing ad hoc software, is you're looking at how do you find 50 of these customers, 100 of them, 1,000 of them, 10,000 of them. And you want to do that in such a way so that you can meet the needs of each of those customers, but you want to be intentional about what you're doing there. The second thing we're going to talk about is understanding your numbers. What do you need to achieve to hit your goals? And I'm going to walk you through an example. And then the third area is having a strategy to reach your audience. So let's talk about this. Understanding your numbers. Let's say for 2023, what you wanted to do is add another incremental $8 million of revenue to the company. So the way we think about that is, let's say of that 8 million, 4 million is just new customer acquisition. We believe that there's really three funnels underpinning your model today. There is the marketing funnel, there is the lead management funnel, and there is the sales or CRM funnel. And the key when we think about this is, what do you need to do to achieve this success in 2023? So you notice that these funnels have conversions. So this one has 10%, this has 25%. This will vary for your company from company to company. But if your average transaction value, your ACV, annual contract value, is, let's say, $100,000, or your subscription is $100,000 for the first year, then you know that you need 40 transactions to achieve this number. Now, based upon your conversion rate in sales, it may be 1 out of 4. It may be something different. But we know that we're going to need 160 sales qualified leads to be able to achieve this type of goal. We also know that we need to create 1,600 market qualified leads. Those are people raising their hand. They're interested in your organization, your company, your service. And typically for most B2B companies, there's about a 10% graduation from a market qualified lead to a sales qualified lead. And then if this is your target audience, what are the campaigns, programs, and engagement that you're going to have to create 1,600 market qualified leads next year? Now, what we do also to break this model down is we say for revenue engineering, how many market qualified leads need to be created every month? 133. How many need to be graduated into sales qualified leads every month, which is 13? And how many need to be closed so that you can meet your numbers, 3.4 per month? This is just fantastic because what we find with most companies is they're spending all their time in the CRM funnel. They're not thinking about how they're going to create these other two funnels. And this major funnel here where you're creating the demand is going to be really important. That's what we're talking about today. So when you create this funnel, it gives you the opportunity to work on these other two funnels and take interest and convert it into revenue. Now this is one set of funnels which could be broken down by industry, down by solution, broken down by geography. Let's say you have different theaters, as I've had across the world. Another thing that I look at is, especially since we're in the recession today, is what is the shortest path to revenue for your company? What is the best way for you to create demand? Well, for a lot of companies out there today, it's the customer upsell, cross-sell opportunity that you have in front of you. And that's what we look at as the hidden gem during the recession. So this is another way we can actually sit down with you and create these funnels and start thinking about what is the upsell opportunity that you have. We've done a lot of work with companies in this area. The third area that we had at Intact as an example is half of our revenue came through sell-through partners. That was just an incredible experience of having over 300 OEM partners take our accounting solutions and embed them in their solution as they went to market. And so in this case, we also are doing the same thing here in this model of creating another $2.5 million next year selling through partners. And then finally, what happens when you introduce new services or new solutions in the year? Well, you want to make sure that you don't just make the investment to build that service or solution. You want to make sure you have a separate set of campaigns and programs on how you're going to get adoption for that solution so that you can start driving ROI. So if you kind of recap that, we look at what we call funnel management, revenue engineering, and we look at how you can get to the $8 million as we're thinking about this. This becomes very intentional in terms of not only who we want as far as partners and customers and what we're going to sell to them, but also it also gives us a great example of what we need to do every month to make this real. What number of market qualified leads, sales qualified leads, and customer contracts do we need to achieve in a given month, quarter, year to actually manifest these results? So this is what we call the intentional approach. The next part of putting in this revenue acceleration engine, as we call that, is really focusing around messaging. And messaging is fantastic. As we work with a lot of companies, we find that their messaging it's good, but in many cases, it's tactically focused. If you're a software company, you may be focusing on your solution. If you offer, let's say, a supply chain visibility solution, you're focusing on the capabilities of your supply chain software. If you are offering a service, let's say that service is focused around providing analytics support for companies, then you're focusing on what that service is. How does that service work? What's included in that service? The challenge with that approach sometimes is we need to figure out how to elevate it from the tactical to the strategic. And so one of the ways to do that is we conduct something called a strategic messaging workshop. And the value of that is to see how do we capture the information that we have today, but then how do we elevate that? And in the case of, you see here with this infographic, we've got 4 levels of the elevator. The first one is where everybody starts, which is, I've got this service, I've got this solution. Let me tell you about the features, functions, advantages that we offer today. The next step is how do we elevate that importance, if you will, moving up to the next elevator, which is what are the business challenges that you solve and address? How significant and important are they? And what's the value propositions that you have that you're providing. So how do we give them they have the headache and the aspirin together so that we can deliver the fully baked value proposition to them? If you want to go up one step level higher, it could be, what's the business process that you're optimizing and the value delivered? So I used the example of a company that provides supply chain visibility, and that's what their software does. So when you look at this, you say, well, that's great, but if I can optimize your supply chain or your supply chain process from start to go, from engaging a supplier all the way through payment, if I can accelerate that, have visibility, what's that worth to your company? It's worth a lot. And then finally, level 4 is taking that and talking about outcomes. What are the outcomes? What's the ROI that you're delivering? So what we find with a lot of companies is they may be in different elevators here. And our objective is to look at all 4 of these and figure out how to move it and include the both tactical and strategic messaging that you need so that you can drive the demand that's going to be significant. Another thing that you do is once you've got the messaging down and you really understand what you're going to do as far as overall messaging and positioning for your company, is where's the validation for that? Well, one of the things that Craig and I realized a long time ago is that we need to validate our assumptions. We need to validate our messaging, our value propositions with your target audience. So wouldn't it be great if you could get 50 decision makers from your target audience to actually look at that, weigh in on that, and give you feedback? And that's the value of doing buyer intelligence surveys, something that we do with many clients today. And the idea there is, before you put a lot of money into demand creation, make sure it's the right topics, the right messaging, the right offers that you're going to need to create for the audience based upon what's important to them. In a typical survey, we cover all these different attributes. Once you have the survey, you can create the messaging. Once you create the messaging, you can create the offers. The offers could be videos. It could be ebooks, thought leadership ebooks. It could be infographics showing the optimized process. It could be webinars. It could be success stories. It could be a myriad of different things that are going to create that educated, qualified demand that you're going to need for your company. So with that, what I'd like to do is have Craig explain to you the next level here. And before I leave that is, sorry, one more slide here. Think about inputs here. So as we talk about the buyer engagement roadmap, we talked about strategic messaging workshop. We talked about buyer intelligence. And we also talked about what's happening in the market. What are industry trends? All of these help educate the direction of messaging and engagement that you're going to have in the core messaging document, which then enables you to create your path for buyer engagement. So really thinking through strategically how you're going to be successful. Craig, why don't you go ahead and walk through this next area if we could?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Bob. So everyone, as Bob introduced me at the beginning of our session here, I'm the other managing partner for On-Demand Advisors, and I have been a serial CMO. And so the experience I bring to the table in helping companies like yourselves is my serial experience in what has gone wrong and really putting in place the best ways for you to succeed. So this third segment here, which is critical, we're going to talk about, and that's implementing your one source of truth. And as Bob kind of laid the groundwork for the key messages and the strategic groundwork for where you're going, we need to put in place the system that's the backbone. And so as we look at that system, there's some critical things that we need to consider. So let's go to the next slide, Bob. And so what we're going to do is even whether you're using Pardot, whether in Salesforce, whether you're using HubSpot, whether you're using Marketo, the fundamental process for your backbone is going to be the same. And I want to reflect back on some of the responses that we had in our poll, because many people were saying they're unsure how to scale their initiative. They have a scattered approach. They're lacking the lead quality. The only way you can get answers to these questions is to have in place the proper mechanism and infrastructure to give you that one source of truth. And so by having your marketing automation system cohesively tied and continually executed to your CRM is going to be fundamental. Now, a lot of you are going to say, well, we have a marketing automation system. But the key part, and we're going to talk about this later, the key part is how is it really set up? And is it set up to give you the insight that you need to scale the demand in the correct areas through the correct lead channels? Is it giving you the insight so that you can invest and divest appropriately? So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the dimensions of the next slide that we consider as we're interrogating. And what we do is we'll come in and interrogate what your current setup is. And if you, of course, you don't have anything, then we're going to come in with a best practice. But what our goal here again is how do we set you up for the best ways to succeed by learning from all the mistakes we've seen in hundreds of other software companies. And so as we go through this method here on putting in place your as we call it, the prospect to sales superhighway, these are the key dimensions that we interrogate in your system of record. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is do a process review. Then we're going to go look at the optimization of the design. We're going to look at your pricing, your bundling. What is the best way? We tying that back to the strategy you put in place earlier, as Bob mentioned. And then we're going to look at the prospects. We're going to look at segmentation of your audiences, not just the roles, but the individual industries potentially, so that we can appropriately get those messages out in the most potent way. And then we're going to look at constructing campaigns. And that's not just your email campaigns or webinars. That's looking at how we're tracking your other activities in your marketing so that you can generate activity. And then we're going to talk about step 7 a little later in step 5, which is looking at the insight that we're gleaning from this, and how do we put in place the correct reporting and dashboard so that you can in fact do step 8, which is iterate and improve. And that's something you're going to be doing weekly, monthly, quarterly. It's a never-ending thing on step 8. So on that note, Bob, I'd like to hand it back to you for step 4 in our system.
Thanks, Craig. Really appreciate that. As Craig walked you through, at this stage now, you've got the foundation building blocks put in place in terms of how to scale your demand. Now it's about doing it. Now it's about executing that. So now what we want to talk about is executing the buyer engagement roadmap. And one of the things that makes us unique as a company is there are a lot of companies out there that create what we call top of funnel offers. And they may be something in terms of marketing campaign. One thing that we do is we think a little bit differently. We think about what do you need to be successful in your sales process. And so if you got a sales team, and let's say that sales team is 5 salespeople, you really think through and think about how does the sales process align with the buying process? And then what are the sales tools you're going to need to engage with that audience to move them with velocity through that buyer's journey? And those also become marketing offers that are important to your audience. So here's kind of an interesting stat. When you create market qualified leads through a variety of different campaigns and programs that you have, what you typically find as a B2B company is that up to 90% of them are not ready for sales. It means that they're interested, they're just not qualified yet. So what you really need to do is you need to have a plan to help your champion be successful in terms of the education, selection, and implementation of your solution. That's all part of this demand process that we're talking about. And as we said earlier, you start with the sales tools. So let me give you an example, a buyer's guide. If your audience doesn't know how to buy your type of solution, wouldn't it be great to offer them a buyer's guide on how to look at the critical elements that they're going to need to evaluate and buy your type of software solution or service? It's really a great way to think about that because you're providing the education, but you're also helping set some preferences with the audience. The other thing we talk about is aligning how you create the offers with the buyer's journey. So what we have over here is we talked about 3 funnels. We have top of funnel offers, we have middle funnel offers, and we have bottom funnel offers. So top of funnel offers are really focusing on strategic elements that you need to put in place. It could be things like thought leadership webinars. It could be an explainer video about what you do. It could be starting to present some results that you have from your survey of decision makers that you want to share that knowledge with your audience. Middle funnel offers are going to be, in many cases, what does your sales team and your champion, prospect champion, need from you in terms of moving them through the sales process? How do they cost justify this with an ROI guide? How do they get other people involved in the process to understand what you do through an explainer, demo, or video? How do they make sure that they've fully baked in how to buy this solution, evaluate it, and then how do they understand who are some of your successes that you've been able to generate results for? And then there's bottom of funnel or sales offers that you need to have. What's great about these offers is that they stand the test of time. They engage your audience, they educate your audience, they help bring your audience through the buyer's journey, and do that in a fully immersive way in terms of working your sales team together with the prospect. And then finally, you want to engage the right channels with the buyer's journey. So there are a lot of innovative things that we do at On-Demand Advisors to actually help you do that. It could be a influencer leverage program where we're bringing in some of the thought leaders in the industry to work with you in terms of leveraging their knowledge together with your services or solutions. It could be a LinkedIn program where we're actually doing something, again, getting to some of the key decision makers that you have and getting them involved with your 5-stage webinar series of thought leadership in that area. So it's really about bringing together the right components here. And once we do that, it's executing that engine each and every day. Now, Craig's going to talk to you about once you do have the campaigns in flight, and they're going out every week, now you've got a chance to really look at how you're going to evaluate them.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Bob. And as I mentioned in our process earlier, one of the key points before we do the feedback loop is doing the proper interrogation. So then the question is, what am I actually looking at? And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at a number of different dimensions across different roles within your company, whether it's marketing, whether it's sales, or whether it's the chief executive. And what are the different factors you should be looking at a minimum? And of course, there's many things we can look at, but what are the minimum things we should be looking at that actually make a difference on a week-to-week basis? So let's go forward in our slide, Bob. This first dashboard here, these are critical dimensions you should be measuring at a minimum. So we're going to take the assumption that you're going to multiple industries or multiple, and you potentially have multiple products, but even if you had one product and you're going across multiple industries, there are critical dimensions that you should be looking at. So you're going to be looking at what are the different leads you're generating by industry. You know, is one industry overly productive versus another, and is that an artifact of the industry, or is that an artifact of your marketing? So there's things that, in order to improve, as we look back at the poll responses, you know, I'm not getting, as an example, I'm not getting these methods to pay off is one of the answers. Well, what are we looking at? What can we interrogate? What can we test to actually tease out the actual answers so we can do improvement and then test again? So then, what are the leads by product? What's this all against when we think about planned leads? I mean, as Bob pointed out in our funnel math, in the funnel engineering, is you have a certain plan. So how are you doing against plan? And one of the more important things that's sometimes overlooked is what's the unqualified reason? Why are you losing some of these leads? Are you losing these to competitors? Are you losing these to they're just kicking the tires? Are you having an overabundance of research people coming, just looking around your website and looking at your products? So what are the things that's going on that can help us better focus your outbound marketing? And this, again, this is almost the bare minimum of what you would look at. So let's go ahead and look at our next dashboard. And as we look at our next dashboard, now, if we have a number of opportunity or leads that have converted into opportunity, regardless of your system, whether you're using Salesforce, whether you're using Microsoft, whether you're using HubSpot, the fundamental systems are going to operate the same way. But the dimensions that which you look at the data are going to be the critical part. So as we consider this, now the leads have been converted into opportunity in some capacity. And what is the distribution of your opportunity amount by rep? Is that telling you something about the reps? Is that an artifact of the leads? So when we think about the opportunity amount by lead sources, there are one particular lead source that's actually generating more leads than, or more opportunity amount than another lead source. And how can we affect that? Can we take advantage of that? Those are some of the questions that present themselves out of these reports and dashboards. As we go a little further, when we think about opportunity amount by product, is there a product that's particularly selling well for service? I use that in a very broad sense, product or service. Opportunity amount that one of the product or services is generating over another. And then some of the other things are the lead to opportunity conversion rate, because as part of our assumptions early on in our math, in our funnel math, and our projections, is we make an assumption. So we make an assumption that we'll have maybe 10% conversion from lead to opportunity. Is that proving itself out? Are you actually doing better? Are you doing worse? Is that an artifact of your activities, or is that an artifact of the industry? So there's questions that present themselves out of the data that we need to interrogate. Let's take a look at another dashboard. All right, so now we look at, say, the actual sales. So when you close business now, and so what's the sales amount by the lead sources? What's being overly productive? What about by product? What's the sales amount by your reps, that you can actually begin to assess the human resource component that is embedded in your company? So there's elements that we need to take into consideration when we look at these closed results, because they're telling us a story. And so how do we read this information and then present the story to the executive team and say, these are the changes we need to make to make a difference? Let's look at one more. So now we're going to look at the CEO dashboard, and the CEO is going to look at a range of different metrics, from leads to opportunities, from the sales amount by sales rep. So while there are key things that each of the department heads should be looking at, there are a number of key factors when a chief executive logs in the morning, COO, CEO, even the CRO, that those key dimensions will help them have a better finger on the pulse daily of that holistic view of the health of the business. So it's not, again, there's a lot you can measure, but what's fundamentally the most important pieces to measure, and then make the decisions on how to interpret that data. So Bob, back to you.
Well, thanks, Craig. So let's recap what we just talked about here today. The first thing that we talked about, as far as putting in the demand that you're going to need for both Q4, as we're heading into Q4, as well as 2023, is to have your intentional revenue acceleration plan. And this is really fantastic, and we're happy to help you put that in place here as we're heading into this fourth quarter, and start thinking strategically about what you want to accomplish next year. So that would be a good place to start. Another thing to do, and we love doing this with you as a team, is really sit down and look at the messaging, both that we have today and that which you want to create for the future. And thinking about how do you move through that? Because one of the issues we find, especially when you have a place perhaps where some of the prospects are not shelling out the money as easily as perhaps they have because of the recession, is You want your solution, you want your service to be a must-have, not a nice-to-have. And so being able to elevate that messaging, talk about ROI, talk about value creation, talk about what you're going to do to actually be transformative for them, that's going to really help elevate the value and drive the sale. The next area that Craig talked about is implementing your one source of truth. And that's just so important as we work with so many clients so that they can see how they take all of these prospects, all these buyers, and how you're going to convert them into customers over a period of time. Sometimes it's short, sometimes it's a long journey, but being able to do that and go win your market becomes very important. We talked about executing your buyer engagement roadmap. And we talked about something that we do a little bit differently, which is really think through both what does the buyer need, and then secondly, what does the sales team need? Because they should be aligned in terms of providing the right things that are going to help your buyer become a customer. And then finally, we talked about improving and looking at some of the key metrics that Craig went through that are going to be instrumental in terms of your success. And as we talked about initially too, in terms of the model, you're going to know every month if you're on track or not. And so these are some of the key components you look at when you put in a revenue acceleration engine. And you start eliminating a lot of the guesswork we talked about as far as demand creation to try to figure out how do you create demand, how do you create quality, how do you create quantity, and how do you do that in such a way so that it actually becomes scalable? And by putting in a revenue acceleration engine, it gives you the ability to go do that. So what I'd like to do at this point is just open this up for Q&A and appreciate any and all questions that you have as individuals. And again, every question counts. Every question is important to us. So let's go ahead and look at some of these questions. Kind of a general question here that we have from John. Will these slides be made available? The answer is absolutely, John, because we realize that a number of your colleagues may not be able to attend today, and we want you to be able to look at these slides as well as share this information collectively within your organization. So be happy to do that. Next question is from Kyle. Kyle says, where do you see companies struggling? Go ahead, Craig, if you could give some thoughts about that, and then I'll do the same.
Sure. I mean, it's a big question, and it's a big question for which it could have answers in any one of the 5 areas. But many times what we find is companies early on strategy and how they're approaching the markets with their message is off. And when that happens, when that early on messaging is not aligned to the buyer, it really sets in motion a chain reaction that causes everything to fail. I mean, your campaigns are not going to resonate regardless of whatever infrastructure you have. So we find that quite a bit. But for each company it is different, but we do say that quite a bit.
And I would add to that, Craig, that to Kyle's question, it's interesting to give you an example. One of our customers that we began working with, and it's not just true of early stage companies. In the case of AvidXchange, when we began working with them, they were $6.5 million in revenue, and they had been in the same market for about 13 years, but their revenue growth had stalled, so it was flat. And one of the things that Craig talked about that we helped them do was go back and really look at their messaging, look at validation with their target audience, and go through the process of figuring out what was important. And what we found through validation that we did through the buyer intelligence survey is that the messaging that they were using, that they were engaging with, ranked the lowest of all the 20 types of messaging that we validated with the audience. So they weren't engaged strategically with their audience in the right areas, and we were able to help validate that and change that. That enabled us to help them double revenue every year going forward. And so we went from no growth to double growth. So it became very strategic in terms of how we engage with them. Next question. This is from Raj. Raj says, how does the recession change our focus? Well, I'll take a stab at that, and Craig, give your thoughts too. I would say that the recession is interesting because when we find that there's a recession, that the U.S. economy has entered, a lot of times things do slow down, and this is where putting in a demand generation engine, revenue acceleration engine, as we call it, becomes even more important. Because some of the methods that you might have used before or depended on, maybe like referrals, for instance, or trade shows, those no longer may be in place or in play today. So consequently, you really need to put this engine in place so that you've got greater control in terms of the diversity and reach that you have to your target audience, so you can engage more buyers and do that in a very capital efficient way. Next question is from Gerald. Gerald asked, in the 5 parts, is every part necessary? And that was
I'll tackle that.
Yeah.
The answer is yes. And I would argue that you're probably doing all 5 parts now to some capacity, even if you don't think you are. So the answer is yes. All 5 parts are absolutely critical.
Perfect. Okay, and let's have time for one more question here. This question is from Clara. Clara says, what examples do you refer to that where you've had success? So I probably would just share with you a couple of them. We've had success with this approach and putting in a revenue acceleration engine with many, many clients of all different sizes. And I'll give you just a couple examples. We talked about AvidXchange and how we went in and helped AvidXchange do this. And AvidXchange being a software as a service provider of accounts payable, invoice management, and e-payment solutions, and really helping them implement the revenue acceleration engine and do that for a number of years and help them scale that so that they went from $6.5 to $65 million in revenue in 4 years. So that really became just an outstanding story for On-Demand Advisors and for our engagement. Another client that we worked with is not a software company or a services company per se, but or I should say software as a service company, but they're truly just a services company. And that's a company called ICUC, a social media management services company, a company that has locations in 35 countries. And they provide their social media management services to really the Fortune 3000 companies. So their customers would be like a Starbucks, a Google, and Novartis, and people like that. And we were engaged. Their chief revenue officer came to this webinar and a number of years ago, and he was tasked with the goal of growing revenue 67% year over year. His challenge was that they couldn't do that based upon where they were at. They couldn't achieve that type of growth. They could get to maybe 20%, but there's no way they can get to 67%. So we actually complemented his team that already had in place, and we helped them achieve that goal in terms of putting in the demand engine that they needed, that we're talking about today, so that they can have that 67% goal in growth and have predictability with that. So just two tremendous customers, working with two tremendous customers, one in the services area, one in the software as a service area, and helping both of them succeed in terms of different goals. So thank you, Clara, for the question. We'd like to, in closing, recommend a couple of next steps for our audience today. For those of you that are focusing on Q4, so we're here in Q4, one of the things that we do offer for many of you is you've already got a lot of opportunities already in process. The question is, how do you close them? So one of the things that we offer at On-Demand Advisors is what we call the strategic deal review. And that's where we get together with you and really look at how do you close these strategic deals? What are the impediments that need to be overcome? What's the closing strategy that we have? And really help you interrogate that and execute that. So that's something we'd like to offer for those of you that are looking at Q4. If you're thinking about 2023, as we discussed today, another offering that we have to help our clients really get all this pulled together is creating what we call the Revenue Acceleration Playbook for 2023. Now, we've done many of these, but it's really a strategic blueprint or roadmap in terms of how you're going to achieve your numbers next year. And of course, that includes the Revenue Acceleration Engine that we talked about. And then finally, from today's webinar, we talked about putting in that Revenue Acceleration Engine. So let's have a chat, talk about what would be important to you, and see if that would make sense. And we've got some significant webinars coming up as we have here for the next month and the month after that. So today it was about putting in that Revenue Acceleration Engine, getting the demand that you're going to need. Next month, we're going to talk about achieving championship sales performance from your sales team. What we find with a lot of organizations is they have ABC sales performance, and then what they're looking at is how do they get consistent sales performance across the organization, because that's really what they're looking for. In November, we're going to talk about how a sales-driven website can accelerate your sales cycle by 33% or more. And this is really about velocity, it's about acceleration. And then finally, in December, we're going to talk about mastering the science behind extraordinary revenue growth. And what does that mean? So look forward to having you attend. One last thing we'd like to offer up for everybody today is one last poll. And let me go ahead and just share this poll with you. So out of today's webinar, just a yes or no, let us know if you'd like us to discuss how to implement a revenue acceleration engine at your company. And if you do, we'd love to set up a conversation with you and talk about how these best practices could be applied at your company. So just let us know if you have an interest. And as always, we're here to share with you best practices. We're here to help contribute to your success and give you the information that's going to make a significant difference, both professionally and personally to you. Okay, and thank you for participating. We'll keep that poll open. And I'd say this in conclusion for today's webinar is on behalf of Craig, myself, and our entire On-Demand Advisors team, we'd like to thank you for attending, participating, and working with us at today's webinar. We really appreciate your involvement, and we look forward to the opportunity to serve you as you head into Q4 and start thinking about not only your success this quarter, but look at your success in 2023. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.